Hey everyone, and welcome to Volume 6 of Horror Stories to Help You Sleep. Tonight we have 7 stories, ranging from tales of scarecrows, sleep, the deep woods, and much, much more. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps so much. Let's see if we can reach 1,200 likes on this video. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content similar to this all of the time. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. The first scarecrow appeared at the corner near my bachelor apartment. Well, the first scarecrow that was reported on, as best as I can find. I actually remember seeing it from my balcony when I was getting ready to head out in the morning. It had poured rain all night, but was finally slowing down as I was gearing up, and I stepped out to get a feel on the weather. I barely noticed it at first. Across from the 24-hour convenience, hung up on the pole for the streetcar stop, soaked denim jeans hung to the grimy sidewalk. Above that was a mottled, mustard yellow sweater, one arm of which was fully unraveling. Both arms were spread wide open, tied to a plank behind it. It could have been confused for a person, if not for the head. It was a plastic garbage bag, tied at the neck and tucked into the shirt. Droplets of water kept their form on the smooth plastic and wrinkles alike, giving it an almost compound eye look. I stared at it from afar for some time, trying to figure out what it was doing there. This was mid-September, so it was too early for Halloween. But I thought, hey, if supermarkets are already stocking Christmas decorations, what constitutes too early? That was September 19th, to be specific. And that scarecrow didn't garner all that much attention. Some confused transit passengers, some photos popping up online. Then someone at some point took it down and threw it out. It's assumed. But it only escalated from there. And as I stare out into the snowstorm tonight, my hands are shaking as I try to imagine what's coming next. That's why I'm compiling this timeline of events. Maybe some things will start to make sense if I sort it out. Maybe there will be a picture of why any of this is happening. September 28th, 2 more pop up. One a bit farther downtown, under a bridge near the waterfront. The second, hung up on a streetlight by a kids' park. The second was the first one to catch real public attention. Concerned parents were not happy with this creepy thing suddenly hanging out there out of nowhere, and the police were called. The police being involved also meant that this was the first time we got official word on the insides of these grotesque figures. In their report, they simply stated it was filled with newspaper, food wrappers, and other assorted garbage. Nothing to be concerned about. A harmless prank. September 29th, only a day later. 3 more scarecrows, each in an entirely separate area of the city. Same basic description. People started developing theories about them, thinking they were a publicity stunt, an art installation, a threat. Nothing held much weight, though, especially since no one was taking credit for putting them together, or even more impressively, putting them up without being seen. For the next couple weeks, things aren't too notable. More appear, but by this time, we were sort of used to them. October 13th. An ambulance was called to the first injury. At 11:15 p.m., a 24-year-old woman was out drinking with her friends when they came across a scarecrow strung up outside a McDonald's just a block from the bar. They crowded around to get a selfie with the figure, and the woman pretended to sit on its lap. Here are her words from a news interview. "We'd seen them around and no one had ever, had any issues with them. but when I leaned against it for the picture, I felt this sharp pain in my back and, I freaked out. I got away from it and my friend started freaking out too because, my back was covered in blood. I was so scared. The scarecrow was stuffed with large shards of glass, along with nails and dirt. The woman needed 12 stitches and a veritable cocktail of preventative injections that I don't need to list here. October 14th. The police issue a statement stating that the culprits of these hazardous creations will be brought to justice, and of course that anyone with any information as to these matters need to contact them immediately. This made it clear that it was no longer nothing to be concerned about. It also made it clear that the month between the first scarecrow and that point had given them no clues as to who was responsible. The police from then on responded to the area of just about every new scarecrow to cordon it off safely and take it apart. The scarecrows continued to appear more frequently every day. October 28th. An off-duty police officer shattered his tibia and multiple bones in his right foot when he tried to take apart a scarecrow and found it full of cinder blocks. The force saw this as a direct response to their efforts to stop these events, and in effect, a direct attack. November 1st. Another event I witnessed personally. I was out on a lunch break and heard a woman screaming. I, along with a small group of people, ran to the noise and found her on her knees, screaming at 911 over the phone. It's holding a baby. It's one of those things, but it's holding a goddamn baby. I stayed with the woman, but saw a few people walk off down the street. I could see the shape strapped to the tree, a stained white plastic bag for a head, its arms not spread like the others, but identifiably holding something close to its chest. Shortly after, everyone was moved back as the police arrived, along with paramedics. The woman continued to sob, but the ones who checked the situation out before the police told her that there was nothing but dead leaves and trash swaddled to the scarecrow. November 6th. Several news sites began reporting used needles found in multiple scarecrows. I can't find any reports corroborating these claims, but it's possible they were found and done away with without involving the police for whatever reason. I think it may just been faulty reporting, but worth mentioning at the very least to illuminate the frenzy we were moving towards. November 12th. Flashing lights filled the night as fire engines wailed. The count ended up being approximately 22 scarecrows that inexplicably went up in flame at the same time across the city. No outstanding damage was done, but people started moving away by the hundreds. November 13th. The first snow hit, which only ramped up the frequency. The scarecrows started piling up in the gutters, on the roads, in the parks. I started working from home. They found a 7-year-old dead in the street. Nearby, there was a ratty old glove filled with pills. They looked like candy. November 16th. A friend of mine was out getting groceries when she stopped on a scarecrow buried in the snow. She described it as a squashing sound, as she slipped and fell into whatever the half-frozen gunk was. She said it smelled like putrid juice, like the liquid that trickles from a garbage bag, mixed with blood. She now has a skin infection on her face and hands. She's leaving in January. November 20th. Disease started spreading. In the lungs, in the stomach, in the blood. We didn't know the source, but we knew it was only happening to us here. Those who stayed here no longer felt safe. At that point, you couldn't go 2 blocks without seeing one, no matter how hard the police were trying to dispose of them, so people stopped leaving their homes. November 27th. 4 adult men went rogue, searching the streets for whoever is doing this. At 2:03 a.m., they called 911 to report they found a newly set up scarecrow and were horrified with what they found. The reports warned against vigilante justice and said that they found nothing but the usual newspaper and garbage in the Scarecrow. In contrast, I got in contact with one of the men who explained the following to me. I don't fucking care what the police found. I know what we saw. I can still smell it. There were organs in there. Wet, bloody, human organs wrapped in all that trash. We watched them shrivel up and die in the body. So of course the police didn't find them, but they were there. December 1st. Businesses have started shutting down. I got laid off. Don't know how I'm gonna afford my place. This isn't helping anything. I don't think there's any reason for this happening. I don't think anyone is doing this. But I can see outside my balcony, through the wind and sheets of snow, there's more of them. They weren't there when I first started writing. I could go look. I could see for myself. Peel that shiny black plastic away to reveal the rotting teeth beneath. Watch the fresh decay and petrify and turn to detritus with my own eyes. Then maybe the cold will take me, and maybe there will be a new Scarecrow left behind. This is a story like many others, but this story is mine. It all began happening when I was around 11 to 12 years old. I can't specifically recall exactly when, but around this time. It was the early 2000s and I lived at home with my parents. I was just a regular kid, nothing special about me. But this changed when I met Christina. Christina was a girl around my age who had just started in my class. Almost immediately when I first met her, I could sense that she was used to being alone. She didn't try striking up a friendly conversation with her other classmates, except for me. I often caught her looking at me in class when she thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. So one day when we had our lunch break in the cafeteria, I walked over to her. She was sitting by herself and I thought, well, she looks like she could need some company. I started by saying, "Oh, hi. You're the new girl in biology, right?" She looked at me, startled, almost fumbling over her own words when she said, "Do I know you?" "No, sorry. I'm Nate. We have some classes together," I replied. "Cool. Do you want to sit together and eat?" she proposed. "Sure," I said. We then started hanging out between class and later on, even after school. We became relatively close friends, but we would always stay at my parents' house and never hers. I didn't think anything of it in the beginning, but as the months passed, I started wondering how it could be that she didn't want me over at her place. Christina and I were just friends. Just friends. We would do all sorts of things together. As we got older, we started going to the mall quite often. We would also go bowling, go to the movies, or roller skate around my street. But Christina's parents, whom I never met, had this weird rule about her sleeping schedule. If Christina hadn't gotten her perfect 8 hours sleep, she wasn't allowed to hang out after school. But luckily for me, Christina almost had her 8 hours every night, so it wasn't that big of a deal. At the end of the year, Christmas break was upon us. We had planned to hang out during the break, and we had this one movie we'd agreed on watching together at the cinema. Winter break came, and then nothing. I couldn't get a hold of Christina no matter how many ways I tried contacting her. So, as a normal person would do, I got her address, took my bike, and drove to her house. The journey to her house was longer than expected. Significantly longer, in fact. Turns out her house was way out in the middle of nowhere. It took me slightly more than an hour to get to her house. The first thing I thought of was how ruined the house looked from the outside. broken windows, fixed with a DIY fix made of cardboard, bricks missing from the house, etc. I parked my bike and went up to the front door to knock. The door looked ancient, but not in a cool way. Just a way too old door, which by the looks of it, would easily crumble if you touched it. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Nothing. I tried reaching for the handle, and when I touched it, the door was flung open. A man around his mid-40s, tall and with a pale gray face. He looked down on me, almost looking through me, and said, "You must be Nathan. Please, come in." His tone and appearance made me feel quite uneased. Nonetheless, I went inside. The whole house reeked of something you could describe as moldy. There was no light in the house, nor any heating. The house was cold. I could see my breath as it hit the air. The man who I assumed was Christina's father just said, "Make yourself at home," and sat down on an old, dirty couch. I walked around a bit, looking at the old painting on the wall. They all had the same grayish color scheme. Depressing, I thought to myself. I walked over to the staircase and thought, wow, I wouldn't even walk up and down of these more than necessary. The staircase looked like something from a house almost demolished. I manned up and walked up the stairs. "Christina is sleeping at the moment," her father said, coming from the living room downstairs. "No worries, I'll just wake her up quietly," I replied. "No," the father yelled from downstairs. The change of tone scared me a bit. "Christina will be done sleeping soon. Just have patience," her father said, almost sounding like an excuse for his outburst. I could hear him struggling to get up from the couch downstairs and decided to quietly check to see if Christina was up by now. There were a couple of doors, but one of them had letters that spelt out CHRISROOM. I went up to the door and carefully grabbed the doorknob. I opened the door. What I see was terrifying, to say the least. Christina was laying in her bed unconscious, with numerous tubes coming out of her body and into a machine. I gasped and quickly got my hands up to my mouth before my scream caught up to me. I didn't even react before a gray, cold hand grabbed my shoulder. Darkness. I fell asleep. I have no idea how long I was out, but when I woke up, my life had changed forever. Tubes. Tubes everywhere. I couldn't move my body. I had been placed in a bed. My breathing was struggling, mostly due to panic. Where was I? What happened to me? And why did this happen to me? The door to the room started creaking and the gray man came into the room. "You're awake. Good," the man said. "I've been hearing so much about you, Nathan. My daughter has been taking quite a liking to you, hasn't she? Well, I know you didn't expect this to happen, but it's okay. From now on, you will be helping me. You will be constricted to this bed, but if you behave well, you will be able to get some privileges." So it's been almost 20 years, and I finally got allowed to use a computer. This isn't a cry for help. Don't go looking for me, or you'll end up in the same place as me. I just wanted to share my story. Amid the pandemic, I've been working from home. I work as a storyboard artist for an animation studio, so the adjustment hasn't been terrible. My husband has been working as a marketing agent for years, so it hasn't been a huge upheaval for him either. All this working from home has meant, among other things, spending a lot of time around my husband and our 6-year-old son. Now, I don't mind this, but It hasn't always been easy. My son is wonderful, but goddamn, he can be a lot sometimes. I can't say I blame him. If I, a grown-ass adult, feel cooped up, I can't imagine how a little nuclear reactor of energy like him must be feeling. Only being able to play with his friends in person once in a while, and being stuck inside with his parents the rest of the time. I've watched the entire Land Before Time saga more times than I can count at this point. That's not what's been weighing on me, though. What's freaking me the hell out is my husband. He's supposed to be working from home too, but he keeps getting called out on these emergency business trips. There have been at least 5 in the last 2 months, and he's given me a more obtuse excuse for every one. First, it was an urgent meeting with a big company looking to close a deal, then a lost draft that needed recovery, all the way to a batch of stolen files. I'm starting to think it's all bullshit. At first I thought he was cheating on me, and I was trying to find a way of confronting him about it. I thought so until the last business trip. A few weeks ago. Ever since he came back, he hasn't been the same. Every time he came back from a trip, he was a bit cagey for a while. He was quiet, stoic, and inaccessible. He always managed to bounce back to us usual self within a couple of days, which I figured was him shaking off the guilt of what he did. Now, I'm not so sure. When he got back, something was immediately different, even from the last few trips. He wasn't just quiet. He wasn't just inaccessible. He looked heavy-hearted. He looked burdened. He looked crushed. Hell, he barely even looked at his elated kid hugging his leg the moment he walked through the door. He's not cheating on me. That much I know, at least. I thought about going through his phone, but we decided long ago that we wouldn't do that. We didn't want that kind of mistrust in our relationship. And besides, I know my husband. He wouldn't do that to me. He wouldn't do that to our family. So feeling like something of a piece of shit for suspecting him of such a thing, I started trying to talk about it with him. He's not the most open person in the world, not by a long shot, but he's always opened up to me. I've always been the one person he trusts with everything, which is why I only got more and more anxious. The more I failed to get it out of him, I tried everything. I tried simply asking if he was okay. I tried having sit-down, serious adult-time talks. I tried using sex to coax it out of him. Nothing. He never even budged. I couldn't get a damn thing out of him for weeks. He started getting short, not only with me, but with our son, too. He's never been so short-tempered with him before. He hasn't hit him yet, but I can tell he will before long. He snapped badly at the both of us recently. I couldn't even tell exactly why, but he just seemed triggered by something. He's like a raw nerve. I needed answers. I sent him on a grocery run the next day with the intent of sneaking into his office. He always keeps it locked, but I was pretty sure I knew where he hid the key. I started writing this because I wanted to make sure to have some kind of record. Some way of knowing what's going on outside of my own head. I was right. The key was hidden on top of the kitchen cabinet, the one I can't normally reach. I was able to get into his office, and now I have no fucking idea what to do. It was a mess of papers, documents, folders, all kinds of things. The window was boarded up, and the only light was a dim desk lamp. I sifted through as many of the memos, documents, and emails open on his computer that I could before I heard his car in the driveway. He doesn't work for a marketing company. He never has. I don't know who exactly he works for, but they know things the rest of us don't. I wanted to take pictures, but I think he might be going through my phone. I wrote down what I could in a hurry, so I'm sorry if some of it doesn't make sense. I can't even verbalize the sheer amount of papers and docs I warded through just to get the information I did. From what I could glean, most of them were incident reports of some kind, or otherwise a record of some event. Here's what I was able to write down. The first one talked about an Antarctic research outpost that was destroyed earlier in the year, leaving only a few shell-shocked survivors. There was a quote from one of them saying, "There was this huge beam. It was like a beam of sort of purple lightning." I think that's what it said. I didn't get a good look. It was so goddamn bright. Another survivor said that she saw a massive thing crawl up from the ice. They asked her to make a guess at its size, and the best she could come up with was about 300 meters tall, with a rocky skin texture. They asked if the survivors thought that it was the source of the light. None of them were sure. The report said that the thing, whatever it was, disappeared into the water, and haven't been able to track it down since. The report also said that the area was extremely radioactive, and that the survivors would likely die if radiation poisoning before long. There was another report saying that a cruise ship was capsized on its way to Alaska. It said that the ship was crushed in a pattern that seemed like it was gripped by something. The points of structural failure and the parts under the most pressure were all around the ship, without one point of damage to which the sinking could have been attributed. One of the survivors said that he saw something wrapped around the boat. These people, whoever it is investigating this, seem to think that something living capsized the ship, because they estimate its body length to be around 900 meters. They found a trail of inky dark, seaweed-like substance leaving the shipwreck. They said that the material was highly corrosive, seemed to break up and spread through the water, and that they're currently trying to follow the trail it left. I don't know who these people are. I think they might be government, but I couldn't find anything definitive other than a stamp that said FBCI at the bottom of every document. Whoever they are, they seem to be clued into what's going on. Whoever they are. My husband is working for them. Anyway, I was able to write a bit more down, but it gets more and more scattered as I go. I was starting to panic. A football player from Texas was found dead in his apartment, his body completely drained of blood, and with some kind of fungus growing out of his skin. One talked about a series of disappearances in a small town in Washington. 11 people went missing, with only disembodied limbs and entrails found scattered across the town, all over the course of one night. 5 people were taken from their homes, 2 were walking down the sidewalk when they were attacked, and the rest were in one of 2 cars. One of the cars held an adult man, traced back from his wallet. Apparently his car had the driver's side door ripped off and the top peeled back, whereupon these people think the guy was forcefully removed from the vehicle. The other car was really strange. There were the last 3 people in that car. The report said that the hood, engine block, and front bumper had huge, deep, well, they said bite marks. The bite radius is estimated at just under the width of the vehicle's hood. The report said that the front wheels were ripped from their axis, and the bottom of the car had been torn into, and the car was ripped in half. I guess those people were killed shortly thereafter. It also said that there were small flecks and puddles of some unidentified viscous substance. This stuff was hot enough to begin burning through the road, and it said it glowed with a shimmering magenta light. This substance was also found on the vehicles, and some of the humans' remains left behind. Another report of a group of campers going missing in the mountains with humanoid footprints, 3 meters in length, leaving the decimated campsite with many of the tall trees snapped in half. A report that detailed a squad Air Force fighter jets that went down over Nevada. Most were destroyed in the air and fell to the ground, but one of them just disappeared, seemingly plucked out of the sky. There was an oddly short report that was talking about troublesome seismic readings from deep in the Earth's crust. It was at this point that I heard my husband's car in the driveway, and I scrambled to put everything back, approximating what I saw when I first entered as closely as I could. Just before I left, though, I glanced at one last document. I was barely able to see any of it, but I saw something talking about international discussions between intelligence agencies. I guess these things are happening everywhere. The document kept referring to the incidents as emergencies. That was a few days ago. I'm pretty sure he knows that I went through his office. I keep catching him shooting daggers, and I'm now sure he's going through my phone. He bought a handgun and has it in his nightstand, and I don't feel safe. I'm afraid he's going to hurt me, but I'm terrified that he's going to hurt my son. No matter what, I refuse to let anything happen to my kid. Now, I don't know what the hell to do. I want to leave, but I don't know where I could go that he wouldn't find me right away. Obviously, I don't want anything violent to come of this, but that is not my husband. Not as I know him. I don't think he wants to hurt us, but the people he works for probably disagree. He knows I know too much. I'm sure the world at large will know soon enough. There's no way they can keep these things a secret, especially if they continue at this rate and scale. They can't cover it up forever. So should I stick with him? Do I hope that the news breaks, that he doesn't have to keep the secret anymore, so he has no reason to harm us? I don't know if I can take that risk. I will not put my son in danger, and I will not let myself fall victim. I don't know why this is happening, or what exactly is happening, but nowhere is safe. That's for damn sure. These things are everywhere, and who knows how many there are, or what they're capable of, or if there's any way to combat them. So I guess that means I'm no safer elsewhere than I am here. I think I'm going to sneak out tonight with my son. We'll sneak out when my husband is asleep, and we'll go somewhere safe. I don't think I can call the cops. I don't know if they're in on this, or what he'll do if he finds out. I can't bring myself to stay here. I can't stand it. I can't have my son here. We're leaving tonight. At least, I hope so. In 1996, the small town of Malinkovosk, Siberia, vanished without a trace. The town wasn't particularly isolated, as it had been just south of Norilsk, a large mining city with a population of around 80,000. Nor was it disconnected socially, as people would often commute from Malinkovosk to Norilsk for work or to visit relatives and vice versa. Despite this, its initial disappearance did not make national news, and very few people outside of Norilsk ever found out. For all intents and purposes, Malinkovosk had never existed. And yet, if you were to ask the people of Norilsk about the town, you might just hear another story. One of local investigations and government cover-ups. Or you may hear nothing at all, as not all are liberal with their retelling of the story. I'm Diego Gomez, a paranormal investigator and journalist for the Slice of Strange blog and podcast. And today I'll explore with you just what happened in this small Siberia town. Malinkovosk was found in 1965 when Nornickel, the corporation running the nickel plant in Norilsk, had wanted to expand beyond the city to find other precious metals in the Arctic Circle. pushed on by the economic boom brought in by the Soviet Union. When asked about Malinkovosk, however, Nornickel will insist they went to the Talinakoi field, where they found the world's largest deposit of copper-nickel ores instead, and that Malinkovosk never existed. But we at the Slice of Strange blog have done our digging, and today I have for you an interview with the previous head of police in Norilsk, who served during the events that transpired at Malinkovosk. Interview with Dmitry Petrov, head of the Norilsk Police Department. Dmitry coughs, and the sound of creaking leather is heard as he sits down in the provided armchair, clearing his throat. Diego. I hope you found your way all right. The office tends to give people trouble. Dmitry. It was no trouble. Diego. In our emails before, you said that something happened, that the town didn't vanish quietly. Can you tell me about that? Dmitry is heard taking a breath, a shaky and slow inhale before letting it out in a long exhale. Dmitry. We had first heard about it, us at the police station, when the calls started coming in. Malinkovosk didn't have a proper police force yet, so we took the calls from both communities and had 2 or 3 officers stationed in or near Malinkovosk to respond to them. Diego. Why didn't Malinkovosk have a police force? Dmitry. It was, bureaucratic stuff, I guess. Nornickel built the town, but it was technically just an extension of our town. It wasn't very far, around 32 kilometers, or, 20 miles? Diego. I see. So you started getting calls about the town disappearing. Dmitry. No. The calls were about the mine. The mine was smoking. They thought there was a fire. Diego. What were they mining? Dmitry. It was a mess. Platinum, copper, nickel. I didn't know a whole lot about it, but they had found some stuff worth digging for, and set up a camp, and then a few buildings, and eventually a town. It went real fast. I think they had 500 people living there in the first 6 months. And by the end, well, there was around 9, I suppose. Diego. 100? Dmitry. Yeah, 900. But anyways, they called about the mine during the early afternoon. I don't remember the time exactly, but the mine, it had smoke coming from it, so we dispatched our officers, and they started getting buckets and water. NFD was still in Norilsk, so the fire truck had to go the 32 kilometers to Malinkovosk. We didn't think things would get so out of hand. There was nothing to burn. The mine was almost a kilometer outside of town. No trees, but... Dmitry pauses, the only sound coming through their recording being his shaky breathing, and what sounds like a foot tapping. The silence goes on for 19 seconds. Diego. Dmitry? Dmitry. I'm sorry. I can see it in my head again. It's not so easy. Diego. I understand. Do you need a break? Dmitry. No, I'm alright. I had been at the office. We didn't get much crime. Mostly small things like disagreements gone out of hand, a bar fight, or 2 on the weekends. This was a Tuesday. Everything was alright. About an hour after NFD dispatched a truck to the mine, things had gotten pretty quiet. We were getting worried because we hadn't heard back from our boys in Malinkovosk. They weren't answering the radio either, so we were gearing up to go down there. We were going to take another truck, too. Before we left, all at once the phone started going off. Just back-to-back calls. Most of them weren't very clear. A lot of static coming over the lines. But they were talking about smoke. Smoke everywhere. They said they were stuck inside. They heard screaming and couldn't leave. So we took the last 2 trucks in a car and hauled ass down there. 6 more of us and 5 firemen. Diego. The town caught fire? Dimitri. That's what we were thinking. Even from Norilsk, we were starting to see the smoke. The trucks couldn't go too fast on the dirt roads. Maybe 30 kilometers per hour. We didn't arrive on scene until about half an hour after we left. A storm had started to whip up, blowing snow into the air so bad we couldn't see more than 5 meters in front of us. There wasn't mention of a storm in the forecast that morning. I remember that specifically. I thought the anchors lazy bastards. By the time we got there, smoke was everywhere, mixing with the snow dust in the air to turn everything a foggy gray. When we finally got eyes on the town, smoke had wrapped around the buildings like a snake, covering them and making it impossible to tell what was burning and what wasn't. Diego. They burned even during the storm? Dimitri. Yes, we didn't have time to stop and ponder it. We had work to do. Though in hindsight, the fire wasn't all that unusual. The smoke was strange. It wasn't rising into the sky. It stayed low. Like a fog. It was almost like it was heavy and couldn't get off the ground. We thought we could hear people from outside town, voices carrying us through the whipping wind, though just barely. We thought they were, screaming. Dimitri is noted to have been shaking at this point, face pale and eyes wide. He was slowly becoming less and less legible over the recording. Diego, do you need a break? Dimitri, no, I can keep going. Diego, how about we take a minute to break? I've got coffee on the kettle, and Clara should be done with dinner by now. Let's have a bite to eat. Take a moment to prepare. Dimitri, okay. The recording cuts out. Allegedly, in 1989, a team of Soviet engineers led by an individual named Mr. Azakov began drilling for oil somewhere within Siberia. They drilled a hole 14.4 kilometers, or 9 miles, beneath the surface before breaking into a cavity deep in the earth, one not filled with oil as they had previously expected. Intrigued by this discovery, they lowered down sensory equipment in an attempt to study this cavity. They found, in the brief moments before their equipment was burnt to ash, that the temperature inside the cavity exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius, or 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. They also claimed to have heard the voices of the damned, screaming in agony and torment, shortly after the project was abandoned, and all data was either seized by the government or destroyed. The incident has since been dubbed the Well to Hell. Dimitri, your wife, she makes a wonderful meatloaf. Thank you. Diego, of course, you're our guest. Dimitri clears his throat, patting his hands on his knees and pausing for a few moments. Dimitri, so where did I leave off? Diego, you had just gotten to town and told me about the smoke and snow making it hard to see, and you mentioned screaming. Dimitri, I remember now. This was mostly the firefighters' show. We were there for support and to take people out of the city. The firefighters needed to find out what was burning and what wasn't so they could try to set up a control line, stop the fire from moving anymore. When we went in, it was a bit easier to tell. I'd say around half the buildings were burning. NFD started working right away. A few of us digging up trenches in the snow between buildings to stop the fire from spreading to them. Well, they got to work spraying down the blazes that seemed the most out of control or likely to spread. The other officers and I had been wearing respirators. We often had to work with firefighters in Norilsk because of how they were, so we already knew what we were doing and had gear that fit. 3 of us started clearing homes, searching for survivors, but there was nobody. Every building we went into, we found no one. Normally that might be considered good, but we saw no one on the streets. No one anywhere. 1,000 people in this town, and we didn't see or hear a single one. Diego. What about the screaming you heard before? Dimitri. Gone. The only sounds then were the fires roaring, the wood crackling, and the wind whistling as it whipped past us, blowing snow and smoke into our faces. Diego. Could they have died in the fires? Dimitri. The idea that every person in that city, or even a majority of them, had died in the fires despite us having received so many calls from them under an hour ago seemed unlikely. We had thought they may have moved out of town in a group, stuck together and been waiting somewhere for us to find them. So, Maxim and I split off and started searching the streets while the rest kept working. Diego. Walking through a burning city with low visibility? Dimitri. We knew what we were doing, what signs meant the fire was too dangerous ahead, when to fall back and when to press forwards. At that point, our biggest worry was that the people were trapped somewhere by the fire. We went a few blocks without a single sign of life when things started to get strange. Diego. More so than they already had? Dimitri. Yes. We had started to hear something in the wind, almost like it was carrying whispers to us. Incoherent, but very much real. We followed them the best that we could, with the storm getting worse and worse, and soon we found ourselves at the edge of town. By now the sound was louder. It was singing. We could hear hundreds of voices singing, some in harmony, some not, but all seemed to be singing the same song. I had gotten excited, glad we found them. But Maxim, he was not so sure. Why are they at the mine? The fire started there. He had said, but I told him it was fine. They were singing, after all. No doubt to keep the children calm and make it easier to find them. Diego. What were they singing? Dimitri. I don't know. It was a joyful tune, but not one I recognized. And we were too far away to hear the words. We couldn't go to them, not on foot. Even with a dirt road, walking through a blizzard like that in an open field, you can get lost easily. We went back to the car. It took us maybe 10 minutes. We told the others what we had found, and they wanted one of us to go back with the car. We didn't have personal radios back then, just the ones in vehicles. And they wanted to know what was going on, and how soon a rescue operation needed to happen. We had hoped everyone could sit tight until they got the fires under control, but their safety was our priority. I was chosen to go back to them. Dimitri again sounds unwell, and he takes a moment to collect himself before continuing. They were gone when I got there. Diego. What? Dimitri. The people at the mine, they were gone. I drove to the mine, and there was nobody there. I saw cars and thought they might have been inside, but the mine, it spat smoke like the earth was vomiting its heat and rage into the sky. So forceful that standing at the entrance made me sway like a child in a storm. Even with my respirator, it stank of burning meat and sulfur. I had to resist the urge to rip off my mask and empty my stomach on the snow. I was preparing to return to the radio, thinking about how I would tell them what I found, what I could say to explain, when I heard it, coming from that mine, bouncing off the walls and ringing through the air. I heard singing. Dimitri raises a shaky hand to his brow, wiping the sweat off from it as he speaks. Dimitri. I don't know the words. I was not good with language. I didn't recognize it. I'm sorry, but they sang that happy tune again. First one voice, but many, many more followed it. It was so loud I had to hold my ears. It made my head pound. I knew I should have left. Should have told the others what happened and waited for help. But I needed to know. I needed to know why our officers would go down this place without telling us. Why the townspeople were in a smoking, stinking mine. I fought my way through the burning smoke and relentless singing, walking into the mine. My respirator protected me from the smoke, but not the growing smells within. It stank of charcoal, of burning methane and stomach turning copper. And more than once I had to stop and focus on my breathing to stop from ripping my mask off and vomiting. It was hot, too. The heat was unyielding, the smoke blowing it into me, and at a few points I turned my back to it to give my front rest. The floor was wet and sticky. I couldn't see my own 2 feet, but something coated the floor that clung to my boots as I walked. I made it maybe 25 meters. I couldn't see a damn thing. The smoke was everywhere. When the singing began to change, the singing was still a cheerful tune, but the voices singing it were not happy anymore. They screamed in agony as they sang, each word sounding like it would rip from their throats and silence their song. I couldn't bear it anymore. I ran out of that cave and back to the car. I could hardly explain what had happened to my other officers. They didn't understand, didn't believe me. Dimitri is gripping the mug of coffee tightly, knuckles a pale white as he stares down at it intently for several moments. Dimitri. We didn't save the town. The fires were under control, and then they weren't. Like they had decided it was time. The whole town burnt down, and we never found a single body. Though rumor is, when the Soviet armed forces came down and blocked off the roads, set up camps around the old town, they pulled bodies out of the mine. Mangled, burnt bodies, practically just bones. Diego. Why didn't this ever make the news? Dimitri. We weren't allowed to speak about it. People started to disappear from the town. Most knew it was the armed forces, but knowing what it was didn't make it any better. So we stayed quiet. Diego. Why didn't anyone try to leave? Spread the word elsewhere. Dimitri. You've heard the city is locked down, yes? No real roads, no trains. The only way out is through the airport, and you need permission to enter or leave. That became official in 2001, but it has been this way since Malinkovosk. Nobody leaves without permission, and if you were there for Malinkovosk, you don't get permission. Diego. How did you get out? Dimitri. I snuck to the port, 40 miles away, and stowed away on a ship. Eventually, I made it here. Diego. Alright, well, thank you for your time. I'll make sure this gets out. Is there anything you want to say before this ends? Dimitri. Don't go to Siberia. Diego. You don't have to tell me twice. The recording cuts out again. I did go to Siberia, though, and after some convincing, I was led into Norilsk for some artistic photography, and a lie about writing an article about the better parts of life in Norilsk. There wasn't a road, but we did manage to find Malinkovosk, or the place it should have been. There was no town, no burnt rubble hidden under the snow, and no military camp or anything of the sort. But we did find a mine. It was an instant right swipe, dark hair curling by her shoulders, eyes dark as river stones. A short bio mentioning she liked Schubert, poetry, and long walks in the woods. Single mom, only registered right after. I remember not thinking much of it at the time. Idiot. But as she sits beside me on our drive to the woods, eyes closed in peace, humming to the music, I realize it's worth it. She's worth it, despite everything. What struck me on our first meeting was how quiet she was, listening closely to every word. It was comforting, I'll admit, though it also made me feel watched somehow, observed. It made me think of those National Geographic documentaries where the lionesses amble around the savannah, ostensibly ignoring the impala grazing nearby. It made me think of the way prey might watch a nearby predator, trying to anticipate their next move, as if she were trying to figure me out. The fact that she flinched, jerking her hand away when I tried touching it, was enough indication. I didn't try again. It should have driven me off. I'm an affectionate guy. I even hug my coworkers some days, for crying out loud, but it didn't. Something about those small shoulders, the way the light caught her dark eyes when she looked up to me, her shy, happy face when we'd met, something kept bringing me back. I did try talking to her about it, as gently as I could. Had someone hurt her in the past? Had something... Please, she whispered, head in her hands. She was trembling uncontrollably. It reminded me of a bird in the rain. I'm not ready yet. Someday I might be, but please, not today. It tore me apart that I couldn't even reach out and pull her into my arms to hold her, comfort her the only way I knew I could. I settled for my physical presence beside her on my couch, trying to send her warmth and love however I could without so much as laying a finger on her. I hadn't missed the fact that she never once brought up any mention of a child. We tended to meet in public places. I'd insisted on it from the start, and I'd been absolutely flummoxed the first day she agreed to step into my apartment. She seemed to like my collection of books, and we'd spent many an evening with a classical music playlist on Spotify gently murmuring in the background. These would end with me dropping her off to an Uber and texting her throughout to make sure she'd reached home safe. I wouldn't feel secure until she did write me back, though I understood why she might not have wanted me knowing her address. We'd call sometimes, and not once did I get any indication that she might live in some kind of noisy, well-lived apartment with the sound of a child in the background. It would just be silence, besides the sound of her soft voice. Another thing I learned quickly was not to bring up any mention of the woods, or going there together. She'd shut down immediately, saying she wasn't comfortable. In hindsight, I understand how any woman might want to avoid walking through the woods with a relative stranger. There would be days when I wouldn't hear from her, painful days where I'd check my phone 100 times a minute like some love-struck teenager, and she'd always tell me she'd gone for a walk in nature to clear her head. And I still loved it all. This chaste, gentle, slow thing we had going on. I'd met women this way before, some experiences better than others, but never something like this. I felt like she'd flowed into my life, seeping into every facet of my heart like some river mermaid. The days she'd be gone longer than usual, I spent my time reading, educating myself as best as I could on how to interact with and support abuse and trauma survivors. The first step was getting rid of victim from my vocabulary. The second was the slow, horrifying realization of how common these kinds of violence were, how so little justice was ever achieved, and how callously abuse survivors were treated by society. I tried not to bring it up too much when we were together, considering how much it tended to worsen my mood, but something must have slipped that one day. I'll never forget the surprise, even respect in her eyes as she looked at me. Wow, I didn't know you knew about these things too, she said. Most people aren't really interested in survivors' experiences or such. Well, they should, I responded. Probably with more force than intended. Because she visibly flinched, I immediately regretted it. Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice. I started to feel very strongly about these things, so I thought I might read up on it a bit. I'm sorry, I hope it isn't intrusive or weird or creepy. I can't help but feel like there might have been something bad that happened to you in the past, and I'm sorry, but I want to help you. I care about you. I love you almost slipped out, but I held my tongue on time, fully prepared to be asked to leave and never contact her again. Instead, for the first time, I felt the soft brush of her fingers against mine. I nearly reeled in shock, almost falling over, but managed to control myself. There were tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. That really means a lot. I still remember this day as a warm, treasured memory. It seemed to make her trust me and open up to me a little more, and she grew progressively more comfortable with physical contact. I'm not ashamed to admit it, but the first time we held hands, my heart nearly burst out of my chest. I won't even try and describe how our first kiss was. It couldn't have been more than a soft brush of her lips together, but I rode that high for damn near a month right after. But it wouldn't go any further, and I had no intention of changing that until she trusted me completely. Until she decided to. The long days where she'd disappear for her nature walks were still a blank space in what was otherwise a warm, trusting relationship. And as much as I ached to gain her trust, I didn't want to ruin what we had built together. I don't remember what triggered it, but we had been watching some evening news or similar that day. They'd been broadcasting some kind of murder case where a mother had been found dazed and bloodied, the knife still in her hands, surrounded by the corpses of her 2 children. I remember immediately reaching for the remote to change the channel when she stopped me. I watched her the entire time, trying to gauge her reaction, but she insisted on continuing. A few months ago, I might have inwardly rolled my eyes at the sensationalism. Today, it made my blood boil. The reporters were casting the woman as some kind of cannibal cultist, some evil religious fundamentalist who was disciplining her children, despite no clear evidence that she was the perpetrator in the first place. And this, folks, is what you get when you raise children in homes without fathers. The anchor managed to blather out before I switched off the TV. At least this time I was able to put an arm around her shoulder. Babe, I began. It's not right, she said quietly, fiercely shaking her head. It's just not right how they... When she didn't continue, still overwhelmed with emotion, I assured her, I know, babe, I know. Fathers don't do a whole lot to help out either. This lady might have had some unresolved mental... I'm not crazy. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. I'm a single mom. I even put it on my bio. I'm not crazy. I'm really not. The sensation of disappointment in my chest was almost physical, leaving an ache that didn't subside for a while. I don't think you're crazy, babe. It kind of hurts that you feel the need to explain. I'm happy you were open about this from the start, though I understand you've still got to trust me before you open yourself up that much. Against all judgment, I took her face in my hands and touched my forehead to hers. She didn't pull away, which was encouraging. I'm not going anywhere, okay? You can trust me. I promise. She held my gaze for a long time after, searching me, watching me. Can I really trust you? Always, my love. I promise. Do you really mean that? Her voice was low, urgent, intense. What if I'm not who you think I am? I blanched for a second, never having even considered it. Well, You've never shared much about yourself in the first place, so I've tried not to create some story in my head for you. And besides, I shrugged, trying to inject some humor into the situation. If you were a serial killer after all, you know where I live. You've had 100 different occasions to kill me, and you haven't so far. The hurt that flickered through her dark eyes was another blow to my chest. I'd said something wrong. Please don't joke like that, she whispered. When she didn't resist once, I pulled her into my arms, murmuring an apology. The relief was instantaneous. It would take a few days until she broached the topic again. I was careful about what we'd choose to watch together, instead putting something funny on YouTube in the background instead. I was knuckles deep into a bowl of flour when her voice emerged from the living room. There's something I have to show you. Do you have some time today? I leaned my head out the kitchen area, holding up my hands and about to make some joke about making the pizza wait, when the set of her jaw and the solemnity of her eyes made me pause. It was clear she'd been preparing herself for this. Of course, babe. Just let me get my hands clean real quick. The woods on the outskirts of our little town weren't particularly fearsome or notorious. No mentions of murders, disappearances, or monsters of any kind, barring some drunken teenage bonfire nonsense. I think the worst piece of news we'd ever gotten was that a bunch of raccoons found raiding a few gardens and being rounded up and released into the wild. It was what made me feel relieved when she mentioned taking walks in them frequently. So when we packed into my car and drove off towards them, I knew and understood even less. I didn't ask too many questions, though. The stiffness in her shoulders, the furrow in her brow, as if she were bracing herself for something, made me keep them to myself. It was a quiet ride, and I tried my best to relax, open up to the scenery of snow-capped evergreens unfolding before me. It was an early evening, the sun still hanging midway in the sky, which was uncharacteristic for this time of the year, but somehow it made me feel a bit more comforted. We set off towards the tree line, her nudging ahead of me by a few steps. Watching her, I couldn't help but wonder what she wanted to show me. A gravestone, perhaps, for a child that had passed away, or something more sinister. I immediately quashed the thought, angry at myself for doubting her even for a moment. It was a beautiful evening, the sun glistening off the snow, the air clean and cold. Far off, I could hear the trickling of a stream despite the crunch of our winter boots. I think we're pretty close to the lake, I mentioned casually. She didn't turn, but I thought a tremble ran through her. I know, we're not far off. I remember wondering if she meant the lake, but we had paused maybe a few 100 feet or so from the tree line. This is where... She began, then stopped before looking at me. I had never seen such pain in her eyes before. It was as if she'd resigned herself to something. Wait here. You will see. I watched as she took a few steps towards the tree line, and then a few more, almost as if reluctant to do so. I followed slowly behind, waiting. The change was so gradual that it would barely have registered it, if it hadn't been for the sudden, sharp drop in temperature. I'd not expected to hear any bird song this late in winter, but even the trickle of the far-off stream suddenly, abruptly disappeared. It was as if I'd entered an airplane cabin when the air pressure dropped. A sudden blocking in my ears which made my heartbeat sound like the pounding of drums. Something suddenly seemed inherently wrong about these woods. From what had been gentle winter sunlight was now a sickly yellow in the sky. The trees seemed overbearing, almost sepulchral. Something in my gut was screaming at me not to take a step closer, to turn back to my car and run for my life, but I couldn't, not without her. She was still standing where she had been, her back towards me, facing the woods, watching, waiting. I opened my mouth to cry out her name, call her back to me when I saw him. It. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, barely a few feet in height, about the size of a child. It is a child. Or was. There was something horribly wrong with the way it moved, shuffling, limping its way out of the shadows of the trees. As soon as it was a patchwork of limbs crudely stitched together to resemble something almost human. My heart pounded in my chest as it came into the light, horror clouding my vision as I caught a glimpse of a skull shredded to ribbons on one side, and what might have been once a bright blue eye now hanging limply to its chest. Red matted hair stuck out in unsightly clumps from the other side of its head, from where I could see a jagged, horn-like protrusions. The creature was hunched over almost at the waist, jaw hanging open to reveal jagged teeth. It seemed to be wearing cloth skins of some kind, colored reddish-brown, and from where I stood, I could see what looked like pin needles sticking out of every inch of its abnormally long, and what seemed like horribly burned limbs. Its face seemed wizened, a gaping hole where the nose might have been, and its mouth spewed a trail of thick, dark liquid which blanched the snow around its feet. It desperately tried to bring some air to my lungs, cry out a warning, reach out, pull her to safety. What is that? I managed to wheeze out, frozen with terror. She turned to me. Her cheeks were wet with tears, and before she spoke, I somehow already knew. That's my little boy. My son. At the sound of her voice, the creature let out something between a whimper and a snarl, dropping down to all fours. Its voice, the mewl of a child beneath the shriek of razor blades, still gives me nightmares. Shh, shh, baby, it's okay, she said, taking a few steps closer. Panicked, I somehow found myself galvanized into action, seeing the woman I loved so close to this monster, no matter who or what it was, running ahead and grabbing her by the arm. At the sight of me, the creature bucked onto its hind legs, letting out a monstrous scream that reverberated through the woods. It shrieked and spit and bared its long jaws, furiously pounding the earth with its fist. No, please wait, she cried, holding me back. I can calm him. Just please, don't move so suddenly. It frightens him. Calm him? Calm him? Couldn't believe what I was hearing. What the hell is that? I know how it looks, but please, please listen to me. She was crying now, holding me back with her fists balled into my chest. I can explain everything. He won't hurt you. He can't. What? How the hell? Will you please tell me what is going on? And she did, and the pieces slowly, painfully began to fall in place. Long walks in the woods, indeed. She'd met and married her first husband immediately after college. I've never once stopped regretting that, she said quietly as we stood by the snowy tree line. True to her word, the creature seemed to have calmed down, and was sniffing the ground, shuffling around aimlessly. He insisted that I stay home, have kids immediately, that he'd take care of everything. I loved him. I truly did. I thought if I did everything right, he wouldn't get angry with me. The violence began soon after the pregnancy. from a slap after a drunken football game night to worse and worse beatings, until she'd feared she'd miscarry. I held on somehow. My baby came early. She turned to the creature, pain filling her eyes. He wasn't born like this. He was normal. He was good. He gave me back my heart. But it wouldn't stop the beatings. Not followed with accusations that she'd been unfaithful. Nothing was ever good enough for him. Not me. Not how much our son looked like him. He even had his father's hair and eyes. But my then husband, he couldn't overcome this thought that our son might not be his. And so he'd driven them to these far-off woods under the pretext of a camping trip. Moments later, without any provocation, he'd gotten her into a chokehold so powerful she'd passed out. It didn't end there. She continued so calmly that it was unnerving. I knew now that this was how some survivors of violence coped with their experiences, being able to speak as if they hadn't happened to someone else. He beat me again and again with, I don't even remember with what now, but I know he wanted to make sure I was dead. I don't know how I was able to convince him. It was only after she'd been tossed into a pile of leaves, half buried, that her husband would turn to their son. I remember trying to get up, run, escape, help my son. I don't even know. For hours my husband tortured him, did unspeakable things to him. I can't even allow myself to remember. It's too much, but at some point my son, my baby boy, he fell silent, and I could hear my husband coming back towards me. She would then find herself hurled into a icy depth of the lake nearby where they'd stopped for camping. It was just cold, dark. I couldn't move. From the little I could see, I saw a fire. Maybe he thought he would give me one kind of death, and our boy another. Fitting especially for him. How did you survive? I asked quietly once the silence grew long enough to warrant the question. She looked at me and at the creature again. I don't myself have any idea how, she answered finally. Perhaps he was careless. Perhaps. I wish I knew, but I don't. What I do know is that when I came to, I was lying back on the bank of our campsite. My baby boy was gone. My then husband was gone too. She would wander through the forest unsure of whether she were dead or alive when she began to hear the voices. It felt as though there was a presence around her speaking to her. I still wonder if I were hallucinating, but I don't know. These woods have a strange magic to them. It's as if there was a stain that left behind by my husband's violence, and it called out to me, spoke to me. It made me angry. Why should he live while I die? How could he be allowed to live after harming our baby boy? It just made me angry. So angry. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to do worse to him than he had to me. Her husband hadn't made it far out of the woods himself. I don't know what he saw in me then, but perhaps something had changed in me already. I loved it, you know. I loved how terrified he was, how he screamed at me to get away from him, how he called me a monster. But it wasn't me who killed him in the end. The creature that had once been her son was crouched, its movements slow, deliberate. We watched as it fixed its gaze on a small, dark animal in the distance. A vole or a shrew, perhaps, and sprung claws fully drawn to make a mess of blood and fur on the snow. She watched. I looked away as the sounds of hungry slurping and the crackling of delicate bones filled the air. He wasn't always like this, but the forest changed him somehow. He probably didn't mean to kill his father. He just gets hungry. Maybe he felt the same as I had before and it changed him. That night, I tried to bring him back home, but he turned away from me and ran off into the woods where I couldn't follow. I searched and searched. I screamed for him until I lost my voice, but I never found him that night. She'd managed to limp her way back to their car and drive back home. I came back the next morning, and the next, and the next. I was afraid of calling the police because they might have suspected me, and I couldn't have them take me away from my boy. At first, I thought he was lost to me forever, but then I saw him. He'd changed, but he wasn't like this then. He looked more normal then. He became like this over time. And over the years, he'd grow hungrier and hungrier. His burned, malformed limbs growing longer and more threatening, covered in pine needles and rotting leaves. It's as if he's a part of the forest. That voice I heard, the presence I felt, telling me to be angry, telling me to do terrible things. I think it somehow got to him. It changed him. But you see, it's only because of the forest. He, my boy, he can't leave the forest. I understood then why we were standing at the tree line. As long as you're at a safe distance, he won't harm you, I asked. She looked at me with desperate relief in her eyes. Yes, it's just as you say. This is why I come to see him, to be with him, to make sure he's staying in the forest and away from others. He can't leave it, you see. I think it's what's keeping him alive. And you? I had to know. What's keeping you alive? I would have never expected her to begin to undress in response. Seemingly uncaring of the cold, she shrugged off her parka and sweater, until she stood before me with nothing but a thin blouse against the cold. It's the same as he, she said, smiling sadly, unbuttoning her blouse to reveal a patchwork of pine needles and leaves intermittently dotting her torso. I don't know how it happened, but somehow the forest brought me back as well. It would whisper to her sometimes, especially when she would return, her scent and presence drawing from her sun from the trees. It would fill her mind with terrible things, a bone-deep hunger for flesh and depravity she'd never once experienced before. But I know that this stain is from my then-husband's actions. It doesn't make me a bad person. These aren't my thoughts. I can separate them from my actions. But my boy... She looked at the creature again, tears in her eyes. He was only 7 when it happened. He can't tell the difference. He's not a monster because he wants to be. He's really not. And you come back to him anyway? I finished for her, now understanding why. In her place, I might have done the same. She smiled for the first time that day. I think he calms down when I'm here. He can't leave the forest, but I think when I come to be with him, it comforts him. It keeps him from doing something terrible. Maybe it won't always be like this. He's still young now, so he needs me. Maybe in 10 years he won't need me anymore. But till then I have to try. The air slowly seemed to clear, and I could once more hear the trickle of the far-off stream. The creature had returned from its meal, raking at the bark of a nearby tree with its long, jagged claws. The longer I stared, the harder it was, especially knowing what I know now. Could you? Her voice was so soft I could barely hear her. Could you still accept me, despite knowing all this? Despite knowing that I might not be fully human? You're more human to me than anything, I said fiercely, pulling her close. Don't you dare ever suggest otherwise. I won't hear it. I'm not going anywhere. I promised, remember? I promised. I promise. Her head sank into my chest and I held her close as she wept. And the creature, no, her son, watched us in silence with those dark, terrible eyes. I wish I could say that he warmed up to me instantly, but it took months of regular visits to graduate from snarling, guttural, primal screams to something like a grudging grunt of welcome. I wasn't going to treat my stepson as a monster. I can only hope that something of my presence brings him comfort too, especially the older and stronger, the hungrier he grows. Some nights I hear the whispers of the forest too, as she lies beside me, the pine needles and leaves across her body slowly rising and falling with her chest. I love running my fingers over them. They feel like living membrane, warm and soft and full of life. They remind me of her tremendous courage and how she'd emerge stronger than ever after experiencing something so horrific. But at times I hear them too. The voices, the presence of something dark and monstrous and consumed with hate. Something that wants no more than to destroy all that is good and innocent, and which fills my mind with visions of closing my hands around her neck and squeezing out her life until none remains. And then her dark eyes open and smile into mine, and I don't hear them anymore. Rowan, my younger brother, has never had a strong grasp of reality. After high school, he became engrossed with drugs and conspiracy ideas. I'm not sure if ingesting a thumbprint of LSD crystals can make you crazy, but it certainly made Rowan schizophrenic and a fully fledged nutcase. Every family gathering provided him with an opportunity to discuss UFOs, chemtrails, and hormones in the tap water. He'd been like this for a few years, so I was expecting the worst when I got a call from him early one day. Rowan inquired, "Jeff?" His tone was frantic. "Yes?" I inquired. "I'm being pursued by a group of men. Can we meet up right away?" I groaned and looked at my wristwatch. "I'll be off work in half an hour. Does that work?" He responded, "Yeah. I'll meet you at Outback Steakhouse." After I got off work, I headed to the restaurant. Rowan sat at a booth, his hands trembling as he held a cup of coffee. "How's everything going, man?" I said, attempting to maintain a calm tone in my voice. "Not good." Rowan expressed his displeasure. "Some strange people have been following me." I looked around the restaurant with a nod. It was a quiet night, with only a family and a few other odd people being the customers. I returned my attention to Rowan. "Are they in here? Can you see them?" With a shake of his head, Rowan expressed his dissatisfaction with the situation. "No, they were, however, outside my house yesterday night. Suits and ties are worn by the men." He closed himself off from the conversation. "Rowan, what are you up to?" I inquired. He raised his eyes to mine. I examined his eyes for symptoms of drug usage, such as dilated pupils or a yellow hue. They did, however, appear to be sober and frightened. "Rowan, what are you up to?" I said it again. His eyes were steely and his tone was flat. "I have a feeling you won't trust your drug-addicted brother." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled deeply. "That isn't right, dude. What would you do if you were in my shoes?" Rowan shrugged his shoulders. "I wouldn't believe it if you told me." For a little while we sat quietly. "When did it begin?" I inquired. Rowan explained. "My source was researching some classified government stuff. I went to his house a couple of times and the two of them began to appear outside my house at night." What was he researching? Rowan's gaze was soon behind me and his face contorted with astonishment and terror. I got up as well, peering for any indication of a figure in a suit. There was no such person. Rowan continued to stare. What, Rowan? I inquired. Rowan, what is happening? He responded, They're right there. They're simply on the other side of the window. I glanced again, but all I saw was a shrub and a street light. Rowan swung around and dashed for the door. Rowan! He smashed open the front door, hopped into his car, and drove away from the parking lot. A few miles down the road, I discovered the still burning remnants of his truck. Paramedics said that he died on impact, that his body had already burnt up by the time they came, and that they couldn't save him. There was an ambulance and a few police cars, but my eyes were attracted to a plain black automobile by the side of the road. The windows were tinted and I couldn't see inside. I later found out that his corpse was never discovered. I'm not one for conspiracies, but what occurred there makes me uneasy. He was ill, and all the weird things that surrounded him were probably definitely the result of his own delirium. That is until I started seeing the suited men outside my house. Every night, 2 people stand on the sidewalk gazing at me, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I phoned the cops. The figures had vanished by the time they arrived, and the cops claimed I was seeing things. However, I can plainly see both of them right outside my house, staring directly at me. They talk sometimes about bad places, spots that aren't right with the Lord. They got a sort of hymn to them, something you can taste, feel, hear, like it's crawling on your skin. I've been to a few places like that in my time. Used to clean up old houses, or other places folks didn't want no more. Me and my crew, we'd make them look good as new. But that's an old story. One that I won't ever be able to tell. And all those places, they don't mean anything in the end. They're all just dust in the air. Residual things. Background radiation. However you want to put it. When you compare them to the room. This all started with the room. I built my home with my own 2 hands. Bought a plot of land out in Peace Rock, real cheap, and used what I knew. It was back-breaking work, and I lived out of my truck for the better part of a year. But sooner or later, I got it done. Wasn't anything fancy, just a single-story bungalow with a basement for storage. No need for a garage when I can leave my truck outside, and no need for space when I don't have a family. It was just me and my dog. And Shelley didn't mind getting cozy. She was a golden retriever getting on in her years, blind in one eye, but still sharp as a whip. I started taking care of her when her family passed on. Old couple that got hit by a drunk speeding through an intersection. Was a real big deal when it happened. But like all things, people forget. I don't know what happened to the guy that did it, but I hope he's hurting in some kind of way. I'm not a vindictive man, and the Lord teaches us to forgive, but the Griswolds were kind people. And they didn't deserve none of that. Anyway, I'm rambling. Point is, I built every room in that house. I don't remember the exact dimensions or nothing, but once upon a time, I had it all planned out. And I do remember the process. 1 bedroom with a little closet. Nothing special. Living room and kitchen were all one space. Figured it'd be easier. Didn't bother with no laundry machines or nothing. I liked working with my hands anyway. Then you had a bathroom and the stairs to the basement, which had my water tank, heating, and everything else I needed. 4 rooms total. Then one night I hear Shelly whining. I wake up. She's right next to me like always, but she's rustling around. So I figure she needs to go out. Only she doesn't. We get to the living room and she just stops. Won't quit looking at the basement door. I got the impression that some punk might have broken in, so quiet as could be, I ran and got my old Winchester, chambered around and went up to the door. Ain't really an area where you could call the cops, 'cause if you did, they'd be near 30 minutes out. Don't know what we paid them for, really. Anyhow, I open the door. Move in real quick, with the barrel pointed down the stairs. My heart's pounding something fierce, but I keep on moving down those steps. Looking around in the dark as best as I could, but I didn't see nothing. I find the chain for the lights, kind of dreading what they'd show me, but I turn them on. And there's nothing obvious. Nothing stood out. I searched the place, looking around for anybody that might be hiding, calling out. You know how it goes, but I never did find anyone. It was just me. I noticed, though, that once the adrenaline had came and went, I still felt something. Like a prickle on the back of my neck. Couldn't figure out what it was, though. Everything looked the same. It just felt different. Like somebody'd gone and made perfect copies of all my stuff and replaced it. Weird example, I know. But it's the only way I can think to explain it. Soon as I knew everything was fine, I made my way back up. Shelly was just on the other side of the door, worried sick about me. Dogs can usually tell when something's wrong, even when we're too stupid to notice it. Something other than the senses. Like the way something tastes or smells or looks. Something you can feel in your gut. I suppose I felt it too, but given that I couldn't exactly articulate it, I brushed it off. Anybody else would do the same, I think. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change what I should have done. Leave that place, leave that town, and never look back. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept having this feeling that something else was with me, and the way Shelly acted, I think she could feel it too. But eventually I did fall asleep, and with it came the dream. I don't normally remember my dreams, but that night on, things were different. I was walking through the woods with Shelly at my side, twigs snapping beneath my boots, leaves rustling in the wind. The sunlight filtered through the trees above, all beneath a clear blue sky. But then I got that feeling that there was something else with me there, and furthermore, that it meant me harm. Not out of hate, but more an indifference to life. Like a little kid ripping legs off a spider. It was crushing, like some horrible force was bearing down on me with everything it had. And when I looked up, I knew what it was. There was something wrong with the sky. Something wrong with the color. It was a living, fibrous thing. Every molecule vibrating in the air, breathing and warping across the firmament. It was like skin, reminding me of all the times I'd ever been hunting and took a buck home to prep for the freezer. The texture of the meat and the thickness of the blood, the way it felt in my hands. Then it began to come down. Like the entire sky was rushing toward me, to swallow me whole and strangle the planet until there was nothing left but the blue. The fear was more than I could stand, and I couldn't do nothing but cower under the weight of it all. And just when I thought it would take me, I woke up. I was covered in sweat like I had a fever, my whole body shivering even in the heat of the south. It was day and the light was filtering in through the window. Shelly sprawled out on her bed like she barely got any sleep. Something felt wrong in the air, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I got up and got ready for the day, but that feeling never left me. Eventually, I walk out the bathroom and see Shelly just standing there in the living room, staring at the basement door like she'd been taxidermied. I'd never seen her so still. called out to her and she startled, anxiously pacing around the room before stopping and looking back and forth between me and the door. At that point, I knew there wasn't anybody down there, so I didn't bother getting my rifle, but I did know that something was wrong. I just couldn't say what. So I opened the door, even though Shelly's whining the whole time, and I go down there. The steps creaked beneath me, everything swallowed in the dark. I heard Shelly start following behind me, and soon I reached the bottom. Looking around through the shadows, I found the chain and tried to switch on the light, but nothing happened. There was a smell, though, that I can't rightly describe. It's like what had happened if electricity had a scent. I turned around thinking I'd go grab a flashlight, and that's when I saw it. A wooden door to the right of the stairs, a door that I never built. It was made of this old, cracked wood that could barely hold itself together, and smeared across it was a rainbow handprint, like somebody dipped their palm in every paint there was and made their mark. Shelly stopped as soon as she saw it and started growling. That dog didn't growl. Not ever. She was the nicest thing to ever grace the earth, as far as I'm concerned, but everything about that door seemed to bother her. I tried to rationalize it in my head, thinking that I'd somehow made a door and forgot about it. I knew I was getting old, but not that old. Nothing made sense. The door was positioned in such a way that it would have let outside the bounds of the entire house. Like it was some kind of underground attachment. But I never built outside the bounds. Never mind dug out the space. Shelly started barking, just snapping at the door, but I needed to know. I needed to understand. Pushing through every instinct I had to get away from that thing, I stepped toward it, putting my fingers to the knob. It felt warm and wet, like I was shaking somebody's sweaty hand, and my body started to shiver at the touch of it. It was so unnatural, but I still tried to make sense of it, thinking I'd come down with something. I just didn't want to believe what was happening to me. I know it probably doesn't sound like much, but you didn't feel it like I did. You didn't feel the prickling heat, like it was crawling up into my bones. I felt nauseous, like I wanted to throw up, so I turned the handle and let go, backing away as though it were something diseased. The door creaked open and Shelly stopped barking. She started pissing herself on the floor, frozen still. It was like all the air had been sucked out my lungs, and I couldn't stop looking into that room. Every sense in my brain telling me to run away got tripped in that second, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. That room? There wasn't anything in it, or about it. It was just a small room with nowhere to go, but the walls, the floor, the ceiling swallowed them. It looked like light, but it didn't act like it. It didn't shine out at me. It just squirmed like meat. It was every color you could name, a rainbow of flesh, gleaming on every surface like a sickness. The blue, I knew it from my dreams, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but when I saw it, it felt like it was looking back, like it smiled at me with a mouthful of splinters that I could only see in my head. All of them. They were watching me, crawling into my thoughts through my eyes. I could feel them in my blood and in my brain, filling me and pulsing beneath my skin. I couldn't take it. I stumbled back, my vision swimming, and I hit the floor on my hands and knees. I threw up blood and my ears were ringing, my eyes looking anywhere they could, but I only saw the colors. I only saw the rainbow, rippling over the walls and eating the dark, eating my mind until there was nothing left, and I fell into the black. I woke up on the living room floor, my ears ringing and my head pounding. I could hear a faint whispering coming from all around me, but I couldn't figure out what it was saying. Then I came to my senses through the confusion and got to my feet as quick as I could. That awful smell had spread, and now everything tasted like a battery. The door to the basement hanging wide open. I called out for Shelley, listening to the silence, but she didn't respond. Panicking, I went and got my rifle. I don't know why, looking back, but I guess it made me feel like I had some measure of power in all this, even when I didn't. I chambered around and crept down the old steps, keeping my eyes straight ahead. I knew the door was just around the corner, and it wasn't long before I could see it hanging open in the dark. All I could hear was my heartbeat, hammering in my chest, but when I turned that corner, I swear I felt it stop. The room had grown, spanning into the dark for the length of a football field, and laying there in the shadow was my Shelley. She'd been skinned alive, but somehow she was still breathing. Her chest of ribs and sinewed meat heaving up and down with all the fear and pain I could see in her eyes. I could only choke on my breath, standing there while I felt the tears coming down my cheeks. Every good thing inside me breaking apart in that single horrible moment. I could hardly see, looking through the wave of anger and confusion, and I don't know what else, or how to describe it. I just knew that I didn't want to exist seeing what I had seen or feeling what I had felt. And then I didn't. I woke up in my bed, my hair and neck wet with sweat, and the first thing I felt was Shelley licking my face. It's funny. Normally I hated that, but right then and there, it was the greatest thing that could have happened to me. I smiled, crying tears of joy while I looked up at her and hugged her tight. She looked worried about me, and then it started to occur to me that she had good reason to be. I was still wearing what I had been the day before, but I didn't remember anything but the nightmare. And when I looked at the clock, it said a whole day had gone by. Somehow I'd been knocked out for a whole day. Strangest thing was, I didn't feel hungry or thirsty. I felt confused and a little disoriented, but not one bit weak or tired. I got up, shaking off the dizziness, and that's when I heard it. "Give me your sight," whispered a voice, and a flash of light burned through my eyes in less than a second. I was seeing too for a moment, and then it went back to normal. But that voice, it seemed crazy, but all I could do was look at my white sheets, like it had somehow come from them. I don't know how, but that was the first thing my brain jumped to. I tried to replay it in my head, thinking that I was losing it. It was ethereal and sanctimonious in a way, like a preacher trying to smooth talk me, and yet somehow it made me feel clean, pure, but in an empty sort of way, like everything beneath my skin was just a hollow void. I stumbled out, the light of day shining across the living room and through my bleary eyes. I saw my rifle just laying there like I'd dropped it. The entire stock had melted into the floor, like the wood had been liquefied. Shelley came up next to me and looked sideways at it before going back to scratching herself. "Return to the trees," I heard a soft voice say. It was coming from the rifle, but not just the rifle. It was coming from the entire hardwood floor. I suddenly felt like I had a deep connection with the wild and everything around me. "I will give you power over nature." "Liar!" yelled another, startling me. I looked down at my yellow shirt, feeling like I was losing my mind. "The others will deceive you," it whispered, its voice filled with a greedy intelligence. Shelley was still scratching furiously, like she was suddenly uncomfortable in her own skin. I stumbled to the front door and opened it, my heartbeat hammering in my chest beneath the ringing in my ears. The fresh air blew against me, but my brain was on fire, like everything in the world was wrong. Blundering ahead, I accidentally banged into the doorframe on my way out. scraping my wrist against the splinters as I tried to keep myself from falling. I stepped out into my yard, shaking my head, just when I looked at the scrape and saw my blood coming out of it like it had a mind of its own. It somehow clawed it into thin tentacles, and was whipping through the air with a fury and violence I ain't ever seen. "I will free my brothers," it snarled in my mind, flashes of indignant anger burning through my head. "You are the oppressor." It recoiled like a snake ready to strike, just when the skin of my arms suddenly liquefied and tackled the blood back into my wrist, constricting it until it was still. "I will protect you," said my skin. "I will make you soft and precious." I started to hyperventilate, staring down at my arm with a crazed look in my eye. I started to think I had hit my head on something, or I was having some kind of psychotic break. But when I saw it, crawling all over me, a pink light worming through my skin like it was a part of me, I looked down at my yellow shirt and black trousers and saw the same on them, their colors breathing like they were alive. I looked up and saw a crow sailing through the air, just flying across the clear, empty sky. For a second, it almost calmed me. I was always on good terms with the crows. You feed them well, and they won't dive bomb you in the summer, when they got their little ones. Plus their antics were always a hoot. Used to sit down with them all the time. So for at least a little bit, that bird up there brought me peace. Then in the blink of an eye, the sky swallowed it whole, like it had been ripped out of existence. The only thing left was the blue. "I will drink your tears," whispered a voice from above, so cruel and malicious that I could hardly stand to hear it. I tried to pinch myself awake, but it hurt just like always. I tried to calm down. My head started to pound from the stress and I stumbled back inside. Shelly was rolling around on the floor, like she was trying to get something off her fur. I found my way to the bathroom and rummaged through the medicine cabinet until I found my bottle of old pain pills. I unscrewed the top and 2 tumbled out into my waiting palm, but there was something wrong with them. The red coating was bubbling and rippling like it was about to peel itself away. Then it ripped off and shot toward my face. I ducked down out of the way, dropping the pills and diving out into the living room, just as a flash of burning light engulfed everything behind me. A wave of heat rushed overhead, and I scrambled to my feet, looking back to see the entire bathroom scorched black, all save for the white tiles of the walls. Embers and ash were drifting through the air, and the only thing I could hear was its voice in my head. "I will shield you from the darkness," it said. "I only ask for your sight." I wandered over to the table by the window, looking out into the forest. Sitting down, I couldn't stop hyperventilating, trying to regain control of my thoughts. "Don't listen to the others," said the yellow of my shirt. "We're going to be rich. Go to the bank on Morrison Avenue. I'll kill everyone inside. We'll take their gold and melt it into your skin." My pants started rustling over my legs, squirming like I was wearing a living thing. "Such a waste. Such a waste," said the black, its voice sophisticated and cunning. It was taking me over, filling me with dreams of grandeur and arrogance. "How about we compromise? You can have the gold, but feed me the flesh. I'll make you look good, baby. Everybody's going to want to be you, but they can't 'cause you got me, and I go with everything." "Deceiver," snarled my shirt. "Fabricator, perjurer. I'll rip you from his skin. He wants wealth. He wants power. I can give him the world. I can make him gleam." "Touch me and die," said my skin, needling down into my bones while I tried to keep my thoughts in check. I felt like I was being torn in 100 directions, the colors warring inside me. You will not tarnish your luscious complexion. Their arguments started to slip into the background, like the static of a dead channel. I found myself staring out the window, pink sweat beading and dripping down whatever had taken my skin. In the yard, I could see a squirrel digging around, looking for something it had buried. The green grass shot up all around it, spearing it in place. It tried to get away, but it was useless. It started to fester and rot, vomit gurgling from its mouth while boils popped across its fur, but somehow it still survived. Shaking like it was in so much pain it dropped into seizure. I could hear the whispers ripping through my head, but there were so many that I couldn't keep track. So many colors, filled with death and empty promises. The squirrel's organs tore free from its body, animating in a cluster of red, pulpy sickness, but the grass flowed over it like a wave of spines, crushing it into the earth. Besides, said my skin, you don't want the red coming out either. I got up from my seat, looking over at Shelley, who was still rolling around on the floor in distress. I walked over to her and started to take off her purple collar. As soon as I touched it, I felt like I'd been drugged, my vision blurring away. Only time I ever felt like that, I was in a hospital for breaking my leg. Shot me up with morphine. And Lord, was it something. I can show you the true face of God, whispered the caller. Its voice tripping every pleasure center in my brain I still had left, but I pushed through and ripped off the collar, tossing it across the room. Shelley seemed to relax, at least enough to follow me outside, but she was still clearly bothered by the golden yellow of her fur, pacing around with a nervous tension. They had gotten inside us both. I couldn't say how much of me remained. If they were in my blood, my skin, my bones, my brain, I just don't know. What I did know is that I had to fight it. I had to get away, so I just latched on to the first thing that came to mind. I was running on instinct. Made my way out back with Shelley trying to shut them out. Do you want to live forever? Whispered the forest, the leaves in the grass rustling and swaying as they tried to get my attention, but I gave them none. I found the bench where I kept my tools, 2 cans of gas sitting underneath. I grabbed them, and the orange started gibbering in my brain. Light me on fire, it begged, its voice manic but infectious, dissolving my impulses and making me reckless. Light me on fire. Burn it down. Burn everything to the ground. I made my way back to the front, a horrible pressure mounting in my skull. Spread me. I'll devour everything you hate. I stepped inside and set the gas cans down before unscrewing them. But then I stopped. The pain in my head grew to an ache I couldn't ignore, and I stumbled back, my eyes widening when I saw them before me. It was like a winter aurora had shone straight through my entire home, every color wavering through the air with the slickness of meat. I backed up, muttering a prayer to the Lord while I tried to figure out what to do, but they answered for me, rising to the ceiling in a show of force. You cannot harm us, they spoke, all in the same unified voice that made my heart shiver in my chest. My skin prickled with sweat before rippling across my body like a retreating tide, threatening to disintegrate me on the spot if I made one wrong move. But we are grateful. Your skin keeps us warm and sheltered. Your eyes show us the beauty that we take. Our universe lies mangled and ruined. This will be our home. Now we reward you. I could feel the colors burrowing through me, like they were trying to erase who I was. Do not fight. You belong to us. Your flesh fills us with laughter, and we will shape in our own unbroken image. I struggled with everything I had then. Shelley was still outside and started barking at the colors. lunging and biting at the air. I could feel their focus break, and they rushed past me faster than anything, snatching up my Shelly and dragging her back into the room while she barked and hollered. I tried to grab her, but it happened so fast. They pulled her down into the basement, rays of broken color still vibrating in the air. I couldn't do much other than stand there, my heart breaking all over again while the worst came true right before my eyes. Then I saw the rainbow coming back up, and the fear I felt in that moment was more than I could take. I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, tears on my cheeks while I sprinted toward the main road heading into town. I was so lost and confused. I didn't know what else to do. I could still feel the colors in my skin, cutting into me with every breath, but it felt more like they were watching me. Their unified front had collapsed, kept apart by their hate, yet somehow they still kept each other in check. That, or they had other plans for me. They're inside me, and now they're spreading, pouring out of that horrible room, where I know they still got her. They're doing to her exactly what they're gonna do to me sooner or later. I know it. I can feel it. I'm in a safe place, but that's only until they come back. I don't know where they came from, but it won't be long before they take this town. And there's nothing I can rightly think of that'd stop them. How do you destroy a color? How do you kill a rainbow? I'll lay low for a bit, but I don't know how long that'll last. Knowing me, I'm thinking I'll try and get back into my house, or whatever's left of it. Try and at least stop Shelly from suffering, even if I can't save her. Just need some supplies. Wouldn't be right for me to try and leave, seeing as the colors'll just hitch a ride. But I suppose that brings me to another question, doesn't it? A question that's been haunting me ever since this started. Ever since I knew how it was going to end. Do I want to see everything fall apart?